Clint Eastwood sat in the comfortable chair, his posture relaxed but his mind focused. The set of the talk show was bright, with cameras and crew members moving about as they prepared for the interview. It had been a long day, but Clint was used to the grind. He had been in the spotlight for decades and he knew how to handle the pressures that came with it. Today, however, something felt different. The host, an ambitious young reporter by the name of Jake Hamilton, had been known for his controversial opinions and his willingness to push boundaries. Clint had dealt with reporters like him before, but he could not shake the feeling that something was off about this one. As the cameras began rolling, Jake launched into his introduction, barely hiding his smug grin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have the legendary Clint Eastwood in the studio today. Now, Clint, you've been a household name for years, but your recent decision to speak out about the current state of politics has raised quite a few eyebrows. Some have even called you out for being out of touch with the times." Clint Tim's expression remained neutral. He had been through enough interviews to recognize the bait when he saw it. "I don't attempt to see how the Tim is relevant to what we're are talking about today," Clint responded calmly. Jake, sensing an opportunity to stir up controversy, pressed on. "But don't you think it's irresponsible for someone with your platform to ignore the current issues? People look up to you, Clint. Is now it your responsibility to set an example, to be more vocal about what is happening in the world?" Clint Utina's gaze did no to waver. He had faced far worse questions in his long career, and he was about to be dragged into a debate that had nothing to do with his appearance on the show. "I think the best example I can set is to do my job. I make movies and am proud of the work have done. People can take what they want from it, but am not here to lecture anyone." The tension in the room was palpable, but Clint Tim's calm demeanor was unshaken. Jake wasn't finished, though. He leaned in closer, almost taunting. "So you are saying you don't to care about the issues people are facing right now?" "That TM's a pretty bold statement, Clint." Clint TM's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "What TM saying is that I spent my career telling stories, and I think that Tim's enough. I'm not here to tell people how to think. I'm here to entertain. If you don't now to like what I have to say, that Tim's fine, but I don't think TM's my job to please everyone." Jacob TM's face turned red with frustration, but Clint wasn't about to let him rattle him. The interview had shifted from a conversation to a battle, but Clint was a man who had faced far greater challenges than this. The tension in the studio grew thicker with each passing second. Jake wasn't about to back down. He had built his career by stirring the pot, and he saw Clint TM's calmness as a weakness, an opportunity to get a rise out of the legendary actor. "You know, Clint," Jake began with a hint of sarcasm, "some people might call you old-fashioned, even outdated. You've had a long career, but you think the world is changing? People expect their idols to take a stand, to be more vocal about the issues that matter." Clint TM's jaw tightened, but his response remained steady. "I've taken a stand, just not the way you want me to. My actions speak for themselves. People are allowed to disagree with me, but I'm not here to cater to anyone else's idea of what they think I should be." Jake smirked, sensing an opening. "So you telling me you completely disconnected from what happening today? What about all the movements, the protests, the calls for change? Are you saying you don't care about any of that?" Clint leaned forward slightly, his expression still composed. "What I care about is living a life with integrity. I respect those who fight for what they believe in, but I also respect those who choose to live by their own values, whether or not they are popular. Change doesn't always come from shouting the loudest." Jake TM's face twisted, frustration bubbling to the surface. "But Clint, you are ignoring the responsibility that comes with your fame. It is easy to stay silent and do nothing, but sometimes that silence is complicity." Clint TM's voice, though calm, carried an undeniable authority. "Silence. Snapra TMAT complicity. Sometimes it abroad TMs about listening, observing, and knowing when to speak and when to let others be heard. The crew could sense that the interview was starting to derail, but Jake was too deep into his pursuit of drama to back off. But T, you think your silence sends the wrong message? You have a chance to use your platform to lead, to make a real impact. Why waste that opportunity? Clint TM's eyes locked with Jake TM's, his gaze unflinching. I'm not interested in being a leader of people. Tem's opinions. Tem just doing my job. People can look to me for inspiration if they want, but I'm not the one to tell them how to live. Jake Tem's arrogance faltered for a moment. He wasn't what Tem used to facing someone so unshakable in their convictions, but he quickly regained his composure. So you want saying you want Marie above all this? That you don't want to care about the world anymore? Clinty shook his head slowly. I never said that. I care about living my truth and respecting others who do the same. That Tim's where I stand. The silence in the studio was almost deafening. Jake had no comeback. His usual tactics of challenging and provoking were ineffective against Clint TMC. Composed, straightforward answers. Clint had turned the tables, leaving Jake with nowhere to go. Jake TM's expression twisted between frustration and defeat, but Clint didn't TMT flinch. He knew that sometimes the best way to deal with confrontation was to remain calm and let the truth speak for itself. The tension in the air was thick as Jake sat back in his chair, trying to regain some composure. He had underestimated Clint. Eastwood he thought the legendary actor would crumble under the pressure of his questioning, but Clint had handled everything with unmatched grace. Jake, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. He shifted in his seat, determined to go for one more shot. First, Clint, he began, his tone now tinged with condescension. Tim are telling me that everything you have done in your career has been for yourself. That you have used your fame to push any agenda or stand for anything. First, Clint met Jake TM's gaze with a quiet strength, not a hint of anger in his eyes. Tim stood for things, Jake. Tim stood for honesty, hard work, and respect. That too Tim's the agenda Tim've been pushing my whole life, a personal responsibility. I don't TMT need to shout about it from the rooftops to prove it. Jake, trying to regain control of the conversation, pressed further. But is now, Tim, either more to life than just staying in your lane? Don't Tim. You think celebrities like yourself have a moral obligation to be more vocal about issues? Should now, Tim, you be using your platform for more than just making movies and collecting awards? Riro. Clint took a slow breath, his calm demeanor never faltering. All people can use their platforms however they choose. We've always felt the best way to make a difference is through the work I do. Whether it TM's through the films we made or the stories you told, may have tried to create something that has meaning. Jake scoffed, clearly frustrated. But isn't that just an excuse? A way to avoid the tough questions? Sure. Clint leaned forward slightly, his voice still steady, but now laced with a quiet intensity. TM's not an excuse, Jake. TM's just a different approach. TM, be spent my life telling stories that people connect with, our stories about real life, real struggles, and real victories. If people want to take something from that is TM's their choice. But I'm not here to be anyone as TM as savior. I'm here to do what I do best. The studio was silent for a moment as Jake processed Clint TM's words. His smug grin had faded, replaced by the realization that he was no TMIT getting the reaction he had expected. Clint was no TMT, backing down. And more importantly, he wasn't buying into Jake Ingham's attempts to manipulate him. Jake cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the way the audience had turned their attention to Clint, hanging on every word. His usual bravado began to deflate. So, what you're saying is that you're just above it all? Jake asked, though his Voice lacked the conviction it had moments before. Clint TM's response was simple, but it hit home. No, I am not above anything. But I know what I believe in, and I am not going to let someone try to twist that for their own agenda. Jake, realizing he had lost this battle, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The studio lights, which had once seemed so bright and welcoming, now felt like they were closing in on him. Clint TM's calmness, his self-assuredness, had left no room for argument. The conversation had shifted completely. Jake had come into this interview expecting to rattle Clint, but instead, he found himself questioning his own approach. Clint wasn't TMT, the celebrity to manipulate for ratings or attention. He was the man who had built a career on staying true to himself, and in doing so, he had exposed Jake TM's own weaknesses. The host finally stopped pushing, his defiance fading away. He looked at Clint, now somewhat in awe of his composure. I guess I can respect that, Jake muttered, his voice less forceful. Clint simply nodded, a small but satisfied smile on his face. Oh, thanks. That, you TMEs, all I ask. The studio had grown quieter, the crew now sensing that the interview had reached its peak. The air was heavy, but Clint had set the tone. Jake, now without words, simply gestured to the camera for the show to wrap up. The audience, though they had been waiting for an explosive moment, were left with something far more profound. A quiet strength, a lesson in staying true to yourself in the face of pressure. Clint, Eastwood had proven once again that silence and calm were often the most powerful responses. As the cameras stopped rolling, the crew began moving quickly to reset the stage for the next segment. But the energy in the room remained thick, almost electric. Jake, still sitting in his chair, stared at Clint with a mixture of respect and frustration. Clint had done the one thing Jake wasn't prepared for. He had turned the tables with his calm, unflinching demeanor. The truth was, Jake had wanted to provoke a reaction from Clint, to make him lose his cool and give the audience something they could talk about the next day. Instead, Clint had provided the audience with a lesson in grace, patience, and standing firm in your beliefs. Are you okay? Clint asked, his voice soft yet grounded, as he rose from his chair. Jake hesitated for a moment before nodding, trying to hide the discomfort that had crept into his features. He had a reputation to uphold, but in that moment it had all fallen apart. Fine, Jake muttered, clearly still processing the interview. He did know what he had expected, but he definitely had expected Clint Eastwood to be so unshakable. Clint extended his hand to Jake, a gesture of professionalism that Jake had anticipated. Jake looked at it for a moment before shaking it, the awkwardness between them palpable. Oh, you Lamir, a tough guy to get a rise out of, Clint, Jake said, his voice now softer, almost begrudgingly admiring. Clint chuckled quietly, a glint of humor in his eyes. TM's been around the block a few times, Jake. You learn to take things in stride. TM's expression softened. I can see that, he said, pausing as if reconsidering everything he had just put Clint through. Oh, look, I might not agree with everything you said, but I respect how you handled yourself. Clint gave him a small nod, accepting the comment with the quiet dignity that had been the hallmark of his career. Respect is a two-way street, Clint said simply, his voice still calm. If you want it, you have to give it. For the first time during the interview, Jake allowed himself a small smile, acknowledging Clint TM's wisdom. Fair enough, he replied. The crew members were now finished resetting the stage, and the final segments of the show were about to begin. Clint had accomplished what he came for. He had stood his ground, proven his point, and walked away unscathed. The next segment started with Jake in front of the camera, but there was a noticeable change in him. His tone, previously so biting and antagonistic, was now more measured. The audience at home could likely tell that something had shifted. The show would carry on, but it was clear that Clint TM's impact on Jake had been profound. Clint did know TMT stay to watch the rest of the show. He was no moment there to dominate the conversation, nor was he interested in being part of a media circus. He was a man who had made a name for himself not by trying to be the loudest voice in the room, but by letting his actions, and in this case, his composure, speak for him. As Clint walked out of the studio, he didn't need the validation that the world often offered. His legacy wasn't TMT built on interviews or public opinion. It was built on years of hard work, integrity, and standing by his own beliefs. And on this particular day, Clint Eastwood had once again shown that sometimes the most powerful answer is the one that doesn't need to be shouted. As Clint made his way down the hallway, the echoes of his footsteps seemed to resonate through the empty space. The TMI's interview had been an unexpected one, not because of the questions asked, but because of the way Clint had handled everything. His quiet strength had not only silenced Jake, but also sent a message that would linger long after the cameras were turned off. Outside the studio, Clint was greeted by his driver, who had been waiting patiently. The air was crisp, and the day was winding down, but TM's mind was far from the interview. He had always known that in a world filled with noise and chaos there was power in silence. His whole life he had lived by this principle: stay true to yourself, and let your actions speak louder than words ever could. As Clint got into the car, the driver turned to him, clearly aware of the intensity of the interview. "Oh, how did it go, Mr. Eastwood?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Clint looked at him with a small smile, his tone still calm. "It went fine. Sometimes you need to answer every question with words. Sometimes just being who you are is enough." The driver, who had been working with Clint for years, nodded in understanding. "I saw the clip. You handled him well. He didn't know TM to know what hit him." Clint chuckled softly. He thought he could push my buttons. He didn't know TM to realize I am not interested in playing that game." They drove in silence for a few moments, the hum of the car's engine the only sound. Clint TM's thoughts wandered to the bigger picture: his life, his career, and the choices he had made. He had never been one to seek the spotlight or make waves, but over the years he had come to understand something important. In a world full of people trying to be heard, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is listen, reflect, and act with integrity. By the time they arrived at his home, Clint had already moved past the interview. He was grateful for the lessons it had reaffirmed: the power of calmness, the strength of conviction, and the importance of staying true to yourself. As he stepped out of the car, he turned to the driver with a knowing look. "As not about the noise you make, Thames about the legacy you leave behind. That TM's what really matters." The driver smiled, impressed by Clint TM's words. I couldn't agree more, Mr. Eastwood." Inside his house, Clint settled into his favorite chair by the fireplace. As the fire crackled softly, he reflected on the events of the day. The media circus, the push for conflict, the desire to create drama. It was all so exhausting. But Clint had always been different. He didn't to need the drama to prove his worth. His life had been his statement, and that was enough. The phone buzzed on the table, and Clint picked it up. It was a message from his agent, who had been keeping tabs on the fallout from the interview. "You did well, Clint. The media TM's already shifting focus to the next big thing, but you really showed them something today. Respect is earned, not demanded." Clint smiled to himself. That was exactly what he had been trying to do, not just with the reporter, but with everyone who might be watching. In that moment, Clint realized that the world might never stop making noise, but he didn't have to contribute to it. His message was clear: be true to yourself, stand your ground, and let the rest fall into place. With a satisfied sigh, Clint set the phone down and looked out the window at the darkening sky. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to keep living life on his own terms. He didn't Tom needed the world to agree with him. All he needed was the quiet peace of knowing he had done things his way. As the fire continued to burn, Clint Eastwood knew that he had lived a life not of reaction, but of purpose, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.